I want you to imagine just for a second that you are standing in this pitch black room.
Okay, like total sensory deprivation.
Yeah, exactly. There are no walls, there's no ceiling, it's just absolute suffocating darkness. But then right in front of you, this single thread of glowing light just appears,
Oh, wow.
and it hums.
Hmm.
And then it branches into 2, then 4,
Mm.
then 100. And you realize as you're looking at it that each one of those luminous cold threads represents a different choice you could have made in your life.
Like the job you didn't take or...
Right, the text you didn't send, the words you held back, all of it.
It's a stunning visual. And, usually when we picture that kind of branching timeline, it feels inherently comforting, right? It's like the classic sci-fi safety net.
Yeah, Cobra.
Whenever we fail in this life, we kind of soothe ourselves with the idea that, well, somewhere out there, another version of us got it right.
It's the ultimate what-if fantasy. But what if that glowing web of alternate realities wasn't a comfort at all? What if relying on it was actually a trap?
That is exactly the premise of the source material we are unpacking today.
Yes, and it's so good. It's a blog post and play script dated March 29, 2026 by Fareed Novin. It's titled Plays in Philosophy. When all worlds end, one choice remains.
Novin pulls off a wildly ambitious collision of ideas here. I mean, he takes the tragedies of William Shakespeare, so we're talking Macbeth, Hamlet, Othello, and he drops these iconic characters into a framework built on quantum physics.
Which is wild enough on its own.
Right. But then he mixes in the notoriously dense philosophy of Martin Heidegger.
It's just such a fascinating setup because the play doesn't take place in, heaven or hell. The characters wake up in what the script calls a quantum remainder.
Right. Basically a pocket of probability that refused to collapse.
An anomaly, yeah. They're trapped in this void with this cosmic presence that's simply called the narrator, and they aren't there to be punished by demons with pitchforks.
No, no. They are there to face the exact choices they made in life, completely stripped of all their usual excuses.
Exactly. So the mission of this deep dive is to explore those ultimate questions of choice, regret, and responsibility that Novin lays out for us.
And he does it by systematically dismantling our romantic ideas about alternate universes. He really forces us to look at the mechanics of our own decision-making.
So whether you're prepping for a boardroom presentation this morning or you're just, trying to navigate your own daily decisions, this deep dive is going to totally reframe how you look at the concept of what if.
Let's get right into the mechanics of this, because the narrator opens the play with a massive reality check about physics itself.
Yeah, it's a brutal opening.
It really is. The narrator explains that, sure, physics tells us every choice spawns a new universe, that somewhere out there, every tragedy was averted, the knife wasn't lifted, the poison wasn't poured.
Right.
But, and this is the kicker, as the narrator points out, physics tells us this as a comfort. And that is actually the cruelest thing that has ever been said.
Because it creates this false sense of distance from our own actions.
Mm-hmm.
We love the multiverse theory because it outsources our regret.
Yes, exactly.
We tell ourselves, well, in another universe, I'm doing great, which subtly implies that the me right here, right now, is just like a victim of a bad dice roll.
And the narrator delivers this absolute crushing blow to that exact mindset. He says, you are not the version who chose otherwise. You are this one.
Ooh.
The one who chose exactly as you chose. The dead do not travel between worlds. The quantum multiverse is not an escape hatch. It is an infinite mirror, and every single reflection is you.
You are permanently in the world you made, which means we have to take a really hard look at how we actually make our worlds.
Right. Because to understand why these Shakespearean heavyweights are trapped in this void, we have to look at the psychological mechanics of how they got there in the first place.
And this brings in Heidegger's concept of Geworfenheit, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which translates to thrownness.
Yes, thrownness. Heidegger argued that we do not choose the world into which we are born. We don't choose the century, the political climate, the body we inherit.
Or the family we're born into.
Exactly. We are thrown into existence the way a stone is thrown. We are already in motion, burdened by history and circumstances, long before we have any conscious say in our direction.
I picture it like, okay, it's like starting a massive open world video game, right?
Right.
But you don't get to create your character.
Oh, yeah, no character customization.
None. You don't pick your starting stats. You just wake up mid-level, taking fire.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't control the spawn point, but you still have to grab a controller.
I think that video game analogy is spot on.
It feels like so much of human misery is just us constantly complaining about our spawn points instead of actually playing the game.
Right. And if Geworfenheit is the unchangeable spawn point, the philosophical question Heidegger and the narrator asks is, given that you were thrown, what do you do with the arc of that stone?
Because the reflex reaction for most of us is to look at the trajectory we've been forced into and, well, use it as an alibi.
We constantly look for someone else to blame for where the stone lands.
Which is exactly what we see when Macbeth wakes up in this quantum void. I mean, he looks at his hands, which he still perceives as covered in blood, and his first instinct isn't remorse.
No, it's finger pointing.
Yes. He blames the witches. He tells his wife that the witches knew the future, they spoke it aloud, and he literally asks the void, how is one to refuse a future that arrives already named?
He is using the prophecy as a shield, but it's a shield constructed entirely of societal expectations.
How so?
Well, this is where the narrator introduces another major piece of Heidegger's philosophy.
Yeah.
Das Men. In English, this is often translated as the they.
Okay, right, the anonymous they.
Exactly. It represents the invisible authority of society, what we are supposed to do, what is expected of us, what the story demands.
I see this constantly in real life.
Yeah.
They say you should go to college. They say you need to buy a house by 30.
Right. Or in Macbeth's case, they say you should become king if the supernatural entities predict it. It's the comforting anesthetic of conformity.
I actually wonder if Macbeth wasn't tricked by the witches, but relieved by them. Like they gave him permission to do what he already wanted to do, but he could pretend his hands were tied.
That is precisely the narrator's diagnosis. The narrator points out that Macbeth didn't kill a king, they killed a king.
Wow.
And Macbeth just happened to be holding the blade. He surrendered his agency to Deathsman so he wouldn't have to feel the moral weight of the murder.
It's the oldest alibi in the history of conscience. I was just following the script written for me.
Think about the witches in your own life, the economy, your boss, your upbringing.
How often are you using them as an alibi for the choices you're making today? Macbeth lived his life on autopilot, just letting fate take the steering wheel.
But then on the exact opposite end of the spectrum, we have Hamlet stepping onto the stage. The narrator calls him the Prince of Infinite Postponement.
Hamlet arrives and is immediately cynical, naturally. He asks if death is just performing encores.
Yeah, but the narrator cuts right through Hamlet's intellectual posturing. He diagnoses Hamlet's famous delay, all his endless soliloquies, his hesitation to avenge his father, not as deep philosophical wisdom.
Right, he calls it an inauthentic being.
Exactly.
I have to say, I've always kind of sympathized with Hamlet's overthinking. Like, is it really cowardice? Or is it just modern anxiety? Because we all do this.
Oh, excellent.
It's like endlessly reading reviews for the perfect mattress online. We call it research, but really we're just terrified of making a $1,000 mistake. So is Heidegger saying that thought itself is a trap?
It's funny you say that because Hamlet actually asks the narrator that exact same question, practically word for word. He says, you imply that thought itself is a kind of cowardice.
And what does the narrator say?
He corrects him. He says it is not thought. It is thought disguised as delay.
Wow.
Think about your mattress analogy. The endless research isn't actually about finding the best bed. It's a mechanism to avoid the terrifying commitment of buying one. Because once you buy it, you are responsible if it's uncomfortable.
Oh, wow. So Hamlet is just researching murder endlessly so he never has to actually commit one.
Yes. The narrator explains the critical difference between a philosopher who contemplates in order to act with full understanding and a man who contemplates in order to avoid the terror of being responsible for what he does.
That makes so much sense.
Heidegger's concept of authenticity Eigentlichkeit demands owning the choice. Inauthentic being, drifts in distraction, talks endlessly about action and calls the talking preparation.
Hamlet knew what he had to do by the second act of his play.
Exactly. Every scene after that was just a different, increasingly elaborate reason not to know.
And his refusal to make a choice ended up costing everyone around him their lives.
Right.
Okay, so if Macbeth's flaw was outsourcing his choice to fate, and Hamlet's flaw was researching his choice to death to avoid the weight of it, what happens when someone gleefully picks up that weight, knowing exactly how heavy and destructive it is?
Well, that shifts the conversation into much, much darker territory. In the script, the backdrop of this quantum remainder literally shifts into total shadow.
Because Iago steps forward.
Right. The villain of Othello. A man who destroyed Othello and Desdemona essentially just because he could.
Iago poses a challenge here that I genuinely struggle with. He asks the narrator, what if my authentic self is simply a mechanism for destruction?
It's a chilling question.
It really is. He says, What if, beneath the masks, I have no love, no loyalty, and I am just an instrument of nihilism? Like, are we really saying Heidegger's philosophy gives a free pass to sociopaths as long as they are self-aware?
It is a disturbing implication, and the narrator gives a very dark, completely unvarnished answer. He says Heidegger's philosophy does not promise that authentic existence is good.
Right, it's not a moral compass.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It only promises that an authentic existence is owned. An authentic monster is still a monster. But as the narrator argues, he is at least a monster who looks in his mirror and sees a monster.
Rather than hiding behind a noble cause.
Yes. Iago is terrifying, but he is authentic because he finally admits he wore grievance like a costume over naked appetite. He doesn't pretend he was a wronged man seeking justice anymore.
He owns his cruelty. He takes the controller, to use that earlier analogy, and consciously chooses to play as the villain.
Exactly. But if Iago is an authentic monster who accepts his nature, Lady Macbeth represents the opposite terror.
Someone trying to artificially manufacture a monster by amputating her own humanity.
Right. She steps into the center of the circle, and she's completely exhausted by being analyzed merely as an accessory to her husband's ambition. She wants the credit for the unraveling.
She tells the group that she understood Macbeth's problem wasn't a lack of courage, it was too much imagination.
He imagined the consequences of murder, and it paralyzed him. So she took it upon herself to mathematically, surgically remove her own hesitations.
This is the famous "unsex me here" speech from the original play, right? Where she literally asks dark spirits to strip away her compassion and fill her with cruelty.
Yes. But here, in the quantum remainder, she dissects the tragic flaw in that plan. She tried to achieve authenticity by a deliberate dismantling of herself.
A voluntary self-erasure to serve an ambition.
But she found out too late that the conscience she tried to extinguish wasn't a weakness. It was, in her words, the organ that distinguished choice from compulsion.
Oh, that's heavy. So by amputating her conscience, she didn't become a master of her fate. She became a slave to the momentum of the blood.
Exactly. The damn spot she couldn't wash off her hands in the end. It wasn't literal blood. It was the psychological absence of the conscience she carved out.
You can't be authentic if you destroy the very mechanism that allows you to weigh choices.
It's a visceral realization, but while these characters all wrestled with choices they actively made or avoided or tried to hack, a character arrives who highlights a massive glaring blind spot in Heidegger's entire philosophy.
Ophelia from
Yeah.
Hamlet.
Yes, Ophelia.
The script says she descends into the void, not falling, but settling, like a leaf on water.
It's a beautiful image, and the narrator identifies Ophelia as the purest, most tragic expression of thrownness.
Because she was thrown into a world that handed her a father's commands, a lover's instability, and a king's paranoia.
Right. At no point was she ever asked to choose her conditions. She was just placed inside them and expected to arrange herself around everyone else's needs.
Think about how much of your own life feels authored by others. Ophelia proves that you can't author your own life if everyone else is already written on the pages.
Yes.
It's like, imagine being told to paint a masterpiece, but someone else is physically gripping your hand, holding the brush and picking the colors. Like, can we really judge someone for being inauthentic when the world required them to break?
We can't. And the narrator openly admits this is where Heidegger falls short. Authenticity requires a minimum of physical and psychological space.
Which she didn't have.
Not at all. You cannot be an authentic self when every surface of your life has been claimed by others. Ophelia wasn't inauthentic. She simply wasn't afforded the luxury of a self from which to be inauthentic.
She lived in the silence others forced on her until it became indistinguishable from her own voice.
It's utterly heartbreaking. She failed the test of authenticity because she was never allowed to take the exam.
But eventually, in this play, the philosophical debates have to end. The what-ifs run out of time. The quantum anomaly cannot hold indefinitely.
No, reality demands a single, consistent history. And this brings us to the final and perhaps most vital Heideggerian concept that Novin weaves into the play.
Symptomtode, or being toward death.
Right.
In the script, those luminous threads of alternate universes, the ones glowing in the pitch-black room, they start to extinguish. They don't explode, they just sigh out one by one.
Because without the absolute terminus of death, nothing decided is truly decided. Think about it. If you have infinite time and infinite universes to make every possible choice, no single choice carries any weight.
Right, why stress over a decision if you can just make the opposite one tomorrow or in another timeline?
Exactly. Death is the ultimate deadline. It is the boundary that forces a choice to matter.
And we spend most of our lives trying to ignore that deadline.
We do. Heidegger argued that most humans live in a state of Verfallenheit, which means fallenness.
Like a drift toward distraction.
Yes. It's the constant refreshing of social media feeds, the gossip, the busy work, the noise of daily life. We use that noise as a shield.
To avoid sitting in the terrifying silence, where we have to face our own mortality, and, by extension, the finality of our choices.
But death tears that veil away. Death reveals that the noise was always just noise, and as the multiverses collapse around them in the play, the characters have no audience left. The noise is gone.
So they're forced into final, brutal confessions.
Yes. Macbeth admits that ambition was inside him long before the witches ever spoke. They just gave it a name, and he cowardly used that name as an excuse.
And Hamlet finally admits that he kept waiting for a certainty that was never coming. He wanted the universe to make the choice for him, and when it declined, everyone died by default.
Othello's confession is the one that really stayed with me, though.
Oh, same. He admits his love for Desdemona was a house with no windows. It was suffocating.
He confesses that Iago didn't plant the seed of jealousy. The seed was Othello's own insecurity.
He didn't trust himself to be permanently loved. So he preemptively wrote his own tragic ending rather than live with the vulnerability of trust.
It's devastating. And as the threads of other lives die out, the characters desperately reach for them. They want to jump into those alternate timelines to rewrite their histories.
But the threads pass through their hands like smoke. The narrator tells them possibility exists only in the present tense. Everything after that is archaeology.
Archaeology, yeah.
It's like having 100 browser tabs open of lives you could be living.
Yeah.
You know, the move to Paris tab, the quit my job tab, the start a business tab.
Oh, I have so many tabs open in my brain.
We all do.
Yeah.
But suddenly the universe just starts hitting X on all of them until you're staring at the single tab you actually clicked on. You can't read the other articles anymore.
That distinction is so crucial. You cannot enter those other branches because you are no longer the person who stood at their opening. You are the consequence of the choice you actually made. You are the truth of what happened. Hamlet asks the narrator if fate is a chain around us, dragging us forward.
And the narrator says no. Fate is just the shape our steps left in the ground behind us.
Which completely reframes how we should operate.
Fate isn't something written in the stars ahead of you. It's the story that remains when all other possibilities are gone. It's written in the choices you could not bring yourself to make differently.
To apply that to your own life means you have to stop looking for an escape hatch.
Right.
The quantum multiverse is not going to save you. The alternate version of you who works out every day, who never loses their temper, who took that risk 5 years ago, they do not exist here.
You are the only you that matters.
Exactly. When you make a decision, you must make it with what Heidegger calls resoluteness. Knowing it's yours to choose, knowing you can't undo it, and accepting that weight.
We spend so much time looking backward at the glowing threads of what might have been, mourning the unlived lives. But possibility only exists right now, in the present tense.
We have to own the arc of the stone we are currently throwing.
Taking full responsibility for the space we occupy, while also, extending grace to others who, like Ophelia, might be buckling under the immense pressure of the conditions they were thrown into.
As the deep dive wraps up here, the script describes the stage going completely empty. Except for Ophelia and the narrator, the other characters have dissolved into history, locked into the choices they finally owned.
I want to leave you with a final lingering thought. And this is directly inspired by the narrator's parting words to Ophelia in that empty void. The narrator tells her that even when the multiverse is erased, memory is not what you retain. Memory is what you become. Even probability leaves a scar. So I want you to think about this as you go about your day. If memory isn't just a hard drive of cold facts, but the actual physical, psychological material you were built from,
how is the way you frame your past regrets physically shaping the person you are going to be tomorrow? Are you building yourself out of excuses, or are you building yourself out of truth?
It's a heavy question, but a necessary one. It really is. Thank you so much for joining us on this exploration of Fruity Noven's extraordinary quantum stage. Until next time, keep looking closely at the choices right in front of you.